And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the importance of sleep for young children, but also about nutrition. So I'm going to include both of those in this presentation. Infants go through a set cycle in their sleep, but that cycle the complete cycle may only take a few hours. So it's not uncommon for a very young newborn infant to sleep for a few hours and then to be awake for a few hours. And so that can kind of go right around the night. And we've all heard stories about young parents getting up in the middle of the night because the baby's awake. As we grow older, we become better able to regulate that sleep cycle. And uh, good sleep and good sleep habits are really important for our overall well being and our overall health. And one important aspect of sleep is what's called REM sleep, or rapid eye movement. In adults, we know that this is that deep sort of state when adults are having dreams. Infants spend a really large proportion of their time in REM sleep, and I can show you that here. Across the horizontal plane, we have the age from birth up to 90 years. And this area here is the first 2 years of life. And you can see that those young children are spending the majority of their time asleep, and a really large amount for the newborn. It's half the time they're asleep is in that REM state. Now, we don't know what newborns are dreaming about, but one hypothesis is that this REM sleep is important in the infant in providing the brain with stimulation. Do you remember from last time about the importance of environmental stimulation in terms of the blooming or connections being made between neurons in the brain? Well, because infants are spending so much of their time asleep, this is a way that the brain is stimulating and providing itself some stimulation to benefit that REM sleep. And the hypothesis is that this may be sort of a biological mechanism to assure that all infants, even those in a deprived sort of environment, would receive some active stimulation early on in life. After about 4 months, most infants are able to sleep through the night. It may not be an 8 hour stretch, but they sleep through the night, and there can be some individual differences there too. Some children some young infants have a more difficult time in sleeping through the night. And so there are individual differences there, and there's also cultural differences that can impact our sleep patterns. And so the length of sleep is related to the things that are going on around the infant, things going on in that environment, and parental activities. All infants go through a series of steps in their sleeping uh, time. And we go through a state of active sleep where we're fidgeting and moving into a more quiet, deeper sleep, into another period of active sleep, sort of a drowsy shift as we're waking up. And then this time that we're awake, this is when we're engaging in caregiving activities and social activities with that infant. And then they start to get drowsy and twilighting and enter a state of active sleep where they're moving again in that deeper, quiet sleep. And you see that this cycle is then repeating itself. Now, for those newborns, this entire cycle might take 2 or 3 hours. What happens is by 4 to 6 months, infants begin stretching out this time of quiet and active sleep, especially the nighttime one, so that it's several hours. And then usually most children at that age will have they're reducing their daytime sleeps down to a couple of naps a day, and eventually they'll start pushing through one of those naps a day as their toddlerhood, and eventually push through all the naps. Um, in the United States, it's very common that children will sleep in a separate crib or bassinet, separate from their parents. And in fact, that's recommended by pediatricians in the US. And one of the reasons is we use sort of thick blankets and coverings that an infant could get wrapped up in or not be able to get their breath and to breathe. In other cultures, that idea that the infant sleeps separately is seen as strange. Um, there was a study of Mayan mothers in Guatemala who will sleep sort of in a hammock with their infants. And when they told them that mothers in America slept separately for their infants, they were shocked. They thought that was quite barbaric. They couldn't understand how that could happen. Um, in some cultures, infants sort of just fall asleep when they're tired, and that bed sharing is very common. But because we do see that increased risk of SIDS in the US, especially because of the blanketing material and so on, uh, it's not recommended in the US that we co sleep. Also, I will say this about infants and bedding. Um, a lot of time, bedding for infants is sold as sort of sets with a quilt and all these things. That quilt is a wall covering, it's a decoration. Young infants should be there shouldn't be extra sheets and blankets and pillows in the crib with them. Um, in fact, they're best when they're sleeping in pajamas or a sleep sack that will keep them warm because of that risk of getting wrapped up in those materials. By preschool, I should say something about SIDS too. Um, SIDS is sudden infant death syndrome that's caused when a child, for not caused by something else, stops breathing. It can result in death of the infant. We know that it's best for infants to be placed on their back. Um, that's associated with a lower risk of SIDS. So they should never be placed to sleep on their bellies. By the preschool years, we see children beginning to, at least in our culture, beginning to have routines and structures and sort of family patterns. There are individual differences between preschoolers and how much sleep they need. And they're within a given preschooler, there may be times when they need more sleep than at other times. For example, if their bodies are growing, they may need additional sleep. Most preschoolers benefit from having a set schedule, rituals that sort of signal to the child it's time to go to sleep, such as reading a story or being tucked in. Many preschoolers have a transitional object, which is that favorite thing that they use to soothe themselves. Most usually, that's something soft and feely, a stuffed animal, and so on. Doesn't have to be. I once knew of a preschooler who would hold a Matchbox car in their hand to go to sleep. Um, by preschool, we're already starting to see a link between lack of sleep and increased reports from teachers of behavior problems. But we don't know if that's causal or which direction the causation would go if it was. That's correlational. But less sleep is associated with more reported behavior problems. Some common sleep disturbances we see in preschoolers are nightmares and night terrors. I'll talk about them in a second. And somnambulism, which is sleepwalking. You may have heard uh, sort of old wives' tales that you shouldn't wake up a sleepwalker or that's somehow dangerous. That's not true. The thing we do know is that sleepwalking, if a child sleepwalks once, they're more likely to sleepwalk again. So if a child is a sleepwalker, it's important that we uh, childproof the environment, especially if they sleep upstairs, so that they're safe and they're not going to fall and hurt themselves. So the difference between nightmares and night terrors: when a young child has a nightmare, it's a frightening dream. The child will usually wake up from the nightmare. It's usually in the later half of the night. They may cry because they're upset. They may have trouble getting back to sleep. They may want to be soothed by the adult. They may remember that dream. They may be able to talk about what happened. They may even be able to talk about it the next day. A night terror, when you see that in a preschooler, they are really deeply asleep, and that night terror doesn't wake them all the way up. They are still in a sleep state. This is usually in the earlier part of the evening. They can cry out, they can sometimes talk or moan, move. They may sit up and point, but they're not all the way awake, and they're usually not aware when the adult comes in to try to soothe them or talk to them, and they usually roll over and go back to sleep, and they have no memory of that of what that dream was. This slide is showing that decline in naps as we grow older, sort of pushing through those daily naps a day. You can see uh, the age is going across the horizontal line. This is the number, the percentage of children who take that nap every day. I I have to think that the parents who reported this for the they did their infants didn't nap a day. We're just considering that a part of the infant's regular sleep routine. But we really started to see this transition at about the toddler years of 2, as we see that daily nap going down, such that by the time we're 4, only about a quarter of children in the US are having that daily nap every day. And by the time we're 6 to 7, we see that nap uh, being eliminated for all children, except for this one 9-year-old who takes that nap every day. And then if we extended this out, we'd get to college age where everybody is missing those naps again. Another sleep uh, difficulty here is enuresis, which is bedwetting. About a quarter of children from 4 to 6 occasionally will wet their beds. There's a hereditary link there. It's more common for boys than for girls. For the vast majority of those children, they are simply going to mature out of that as their bodies grow and they have more muscle control over their bladder. Basically, they are simply at this age, those children are simply not able to. They don't have the bladder strength uh, to hold on, and it's not enough to wake them up. Um, so the best response from parents is a non-judgmental one, very matter of fact. We'll just change that, and we'll just change the sheets there. By middle childhood, it's becoming even more apparent that disruptions or lack of sleep can have an impact on children's uh, day-to-day functioning, especially in school. That they can show some real negative signs there from a lack of sleep. Uh, there are many factors that are impacting the sleep for our elementary school age children. So these are correlational. Uh, when there's family stress, children are less likely to sleep. Children who are experiencing enuresis are less likely to get a full night's of interrupted sleep. Children who have television sets in their bedroom during the elementary school years are less likely to get sleep. And I'm sure that with phones and other technology that would serve the same kind of role that televisions in the room would serve.